Well, let's start. And I want to welcome everybody back from lunch. I hope everybody had a good lunch and are ready to be fed some more. And so first of all, I want to say good afternoon. My name is Theo Spanos-Dunphy, and I am the Executive Director of the nonprofit Global Citizen Circle, which enjoys a unique partnership with Southern New Hampshire University's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, supporting the work that Jerry Ann and her staff have done to put this conference together. I'm so pleased to be here today to introduce to you the keynote speaker for this lunchtime address. Berwick Mahdi Davenport, also known as M, is a social justice activist, anti-racist facilitator with more than 30 years of experience. Mahdi is a pioneer in the field of life coaching. He is a coach who coaches coaches, facilitating and mentoring thousands of leaders from all over the globe. M is the prodigy behind the ego reduction formula, which makes possible the integration of social and political consciousness with spiritual consciousness. M is a celebrated author, the loving father of 3 very beautiful daughters. M's keynote address today will invite us all to reflect on the African proverb called Ubuntu that says, "I am because you are." One of my very favorite people, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who popularized the concept during the post-apartheid era, says this about Ubuntu. Quote, "It means my humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. We belong in a bundle of life. We say a person is a person through other people. It is not, I think, therefore I am. It says rather, I am human because I belong, I participate, I share." As M speaks to us about Ubuntu, he'll also ask us to think about the role of accountability and how it plays in the constant improvement and elevation of humanity. So please join me in welcoming M, and I will pass the virtual mic to you, M. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for that, Theo. I really appreciate the introduction, and I'm super excited about being able to be at this conference and being able to be chosen to deliver this message around accountability and truth-telling. I want to begin by simply saying that we live in a very fragile world, and pretty sure that's not something that's surprising to you. But what makes it so fragile is the fact that it is socially constructed. Now, the fact that it's socially constructed means that it is hinging upon our belief in it. Our belief is necessary. This world has worked the way it has worked because we have believed exactly what we were told to believe. And as people begin to question what we've been told to believe, and they are now in numbers like never before on all sides, questioning the very fabric of how this social construction has come together, people will begin to start breaking apart. And we see that now. No matter what side you are on, left or the right or in the middle, you will find yourself having to deal with realities that we've ignored because it didn't fit into our agendas. Now, our only savior, from my vantage point in this, is accountability and truth-telling. And in the African tradition, I would like to begin by telling a story to take us on a journey of understanding how accountability came into being, like what was its sole purpose for coming into existence, and the different types of accountability that exist, and what we have to do in order to make it work. So it will be in those three ways that I will talk about it. First thing, I want to share a story with you about a 5-year-old boy. I want you to imagine this 5-year-old boy. He's a very loving child, very caring, compassionate, sensitive. It feels very connected to other people. And he's in a courtroom, sitting on the courtroom bench next to his 2 brothers, 2 younger brothers, one 3, the other 2. And they are in the process of finding out who will have custody over them. And mom and dad had just divorced. Mother had been declared unfit, and she was no longer eligible for custody. So they were waiting on the judge to render the decision that they thought that they knew, that the judge was gonna put them in their father's custody. Well, on this day, the judge announces that he's gonna put them in his father's custody, in their father's custody. And at that moment, their father stands up and walks out of the courtroom. A 5-year-old boy is distraught, confused, sad, feels rejected, afraid, doesn't know what's gonna happen next. And he feels utterly, totally powerless. And rather than giving into the moment, giving into what the average person would do or what we were expected to do, that 5-year-old boy made a decision to promise himself that he would never experience feeling utterly powerless again, and that he would dedicate his life to helping people get in touch with their own power. Now, that little boy was me. And I'm here because I kept my promise that I made to myself, and the promise I made to my 2 younger brothers and all those that I've come into contact with through my life coaching practice, to help people get in touch with their power. Now, accountability came natural. When I started working to help people get in touch with their power, it would bring me into a natural relationship with accountability. Now, I want you to know that the first reason, if you go to the next slide, the first reason why accountability exists is because of promises. Now, I want you to understand what I mean by that. Not because we keep our promises, but because we break promises. My parents broke their promise. And as a result, it put me on the path that I'm on now. But it started because somebody broke their promise. So one of the first reasons why accountability exists is because we break our promises to each other. It's unfortunate that we break our promises to ourselves, we break our promises to others, and others have broken their promises to us. So that's the first reason why accountability comes into existence. Will you go to the next slide? Now, I want to just give you a basic definition of accountability as we walk through this journey, because I want to tell you some other stories that will help you to really understand why accountability is so important. So I define, from my vantage point of 30 years of life coaching, I've come to define accountability simply as the scale by which truth is measured. And I'm going to explain to you what truth is from my vantage point. As a life coach working with people around anti-racist issues, people normally come to me in crisis, and I have to deliver on the drop of a hat. And people are measuring what I do and how impactful it's going to be on the person that comes to me in whatever crisis that they're in. So my job is to help move them through crisis, and I wouldn't be able to do that without accountability. Now, the other accountability that I'm going to talk about is one of the 3 forms of accountability, that is reciprocal accountability. Now, that is the one I really want you to remember, because Ubuntu cannot exist without reciprocal accountability. And here's how I defined it: the leverage we voluntarily give over to someone else, and in turn, they give over to us, to hold one another responsible for the truth we're telling that does not add up to what we desire. Now, I said at the beginning, we live in a very fragile society, a very fragile world, because it's socially constructed, which means that we are making it up as we go. And as people wake up to the fact that it's socially constructed and we're making it up, and they realize that we can make it up to be something else, people are going to continue to question what we are doing. And like I said to you before, our saving grace will be reciprocal accountability. The fact that we have gathered into relationships and we have voluntarily, here's the key word, voluntarily given leverage to those that we're in relationship with, and they have voluntarily given leverage over to us to hold each other responsible for the things that we say that we want to produce. For the longest, doing this anti-racism work, I found that people's intentions and their impact are far apart. And we have been just really allowing that to exist because we've had no real reciprocal accountability. Go to the next slide, please, because I want to go over these 3 reasons why accountability exists, and then come back to the 3 forms of accountability, because I already told you one, which is reciprocal accountability. So the first reason why accountability exists is because people break their promises. I told you that already. The second thing is that the reason why it exists is to make people aware of their power and its impact. Now, you hear people say all the time to other people, that's a really powerful woman, or that's a very powerful person, or a very powerful human being. And then sometimes in my coaching practice, when I sat down and talked to the people that other people say were powerful, they did not themselves see themselves as that. In fact, they were completely lost for the idea that they were perceived as being powerful by other people, because they didn't see their power and they didn't think that they had power. In fact, a lot of them thought they were disempowered. So accountability came not just to answer the fact that people broke their promises or break their promises, but because people don't understand or don't see their power. So when you hold people accountable, it gives them a chance to see the impact of their power and thus take responsibility for it. So I want you to understand those 2 things are extremely important. Accountability saves us from our broken promises, because here's what it does. When people break their promise, what it happens is it causes a distrust to develop, right? And when a distrust develops in the individual and in the collective is unable to organize and get things done for the whole of the group. So accountability allows for the possibility of the restoration of trust by that person giving leverage over to the other person, and the other person giving the leverage over to them to produce an outcome that both people desire, or all involved desire. Now, the last thing is that accountability was developed to measure the truth we're telling. Now, I want to say this. When I first came into the social justice movement, anti-racist social justice movement, there was a conversation that was non-existent in that movement from my vantage point. And that conversation was measurement. There was no real measurement of outcomes taking place in everything that we were doing. In fact, when we brought up the idea of measuring outcomes, people would get upset. It was like a built-in fear that we had about measuring the outcomes, measuring the truth we're telling. So accountability must come into the picture if we're going to make progress, if we're going to heal our racial wounds that we have developed as a result of promises being broken. Think about the treaties, all the treaties that were made with the Native Americans. Over 300 treaties were made and not one were kept, promises broken. Think about the Constitution declaring that all men are created equal, a promise not kept to all people. So that has to be healed. All of this has to be healed. And the only way it can be healed is through entering into reciprocal accountability. That's why accountability has come into existence. And to help people make people aware of the impact of their power and what their power is. And the third one, to measure the truth we're telling. Now, go to the next slide. So I define the truth we're telling as the outcomes we produce. I don't look at what comes out of your mouth as the truth you're telling. I look at what you're producing, the results you're producing, as the truth you're really telling. And all outcomes have a mathematical formula to them. They all add up to based upon what you're adding to the equation will give you your outcome. If there's some part of the equation that is not accurate, it's going to give you the outcome that's different from the one you're promising that you're going to produce, or the one that you say you want to produce. So what I've done through my coaching practice is take away the idea of truth telling being only about what people are saying verbally, but more about what outcomes are you producing, because that's the truth you're really living day to day. Whatever truth you're living day to day is the outcomes you're going to produce that will match that outcome. Now, go to the next slide. So we come to UBUNTU. And I want to tell you a story about my grandmother. And because she really was the first person that made me aware of this idea, of this concept, of this notion that we as human beings, if we're going to live in harmony, have to see ourselves in each other. If we don't see ourselves in each other, then we exist like vampires. Vampires do not see a reflection of themselves in the mirror. Relationships are human mirrors that give us an opportunity to see the condition of our mind in our relationships with other people. So as a little boy, growing up very poor, my grandmother raised us. She, on that day in the courtroom, she was the one that stood up and told the judge that you couldn't put us in child custody in the state, under the care of the state. She said that they would come to live with me. So we went to live with her, and she didn't have very much, and she had her own children, my uncles and one aunt. We didn't have very much. So when Christmas would come around, our dad, who lived on the other side of town with his new wife, would come by for Christmas and drop us off $1. That was our Christmas gift. So each one of our brothers would have $1. And my great aunt would come and bring a gift basket of fruit, and we would share that fruit basket, and that was Christmas. So I came to not be, excited about the whole idea of Christmas, et cetera, et cetera. Well, one day my grandmother worked her tail off. Not just that one day, but she'd been planning for weeks, and she'd been working extra jobs to buy us some gifts, because she really, really wanted us to have some gifts, because she saw the level of disappointment we would experience every year coming around the holidays. It wasn't a happy thing in the house. So she went out and she bought a little bitty Christmas tree, one of them small ones, put it in the corner of the house, and she bought us some gifts. We didn't know what the gifts were, but they were wrapped and put under the tree, and we were super excited about Christmas. We couldn't wait till Christmas Day for us to be able to open those gifts. Well, lo and behold, we woke up that morning to open those gifts, and those gifts were gone. And we were like, what in the world is gone? You can imagine little boys all excited about opening up a gift, and then the gifts are gone, and they're like, what happened here, right? So my grandmother says to us, her name was Pearl. She said, sit down, I want to talk to y'all about something. We was like, oh boy, here you go. Here you go, I want to hear this. I want to hear what this is going to be about, right? And she says to us, there were kids that lived next door to us who mother was always gone, and they basically were raising themselves. And she said to us, she says, the kids next door don't have what you have. And we were like, what do we have? She said, you have love, they don't. So because you have love and they don't have love, I decided to give them those gifts that I got for you all to show them that they are loved. We were like, oh my God, Tommy, we felt hosed. Felt like, I couldn't believe she had did that to us, right? Because as kids, all we could think about was those toys. But I'm gonna tell you something, that experience grew on me. As I became a mature adult in this world, that experience never left me about what Ubuntu really means. She saw the condition of those kids as her condition. She saw it also as our condition. And even though we didn't have much to give, she shared everything she had. And the most important thing was she gave love to them, because when she saw them, she saw herself. So I say to people all the time as I travel around the country, I see myself in other people. I see my mother in other people's mothers. I am unable to not see my mother in other people's mothers. I just don't know how to do that. I see my daughters. I have 3 very beautiful daughters. I see my daughters at different stages of their life in other people's daughters. And if I found somebody else's daughter in distress, I would come to their aid in the same way I would if it was my daughters, because I see my daughters in those daughters. Now, race and racism has done a good job of ripping that apart so that we don't see ourselves in one another. And because we don't see ourselves in one another, it is almost impossible to practice Ubuntu. I am because you are. We have to be able to see ourselves in each other. And accountability is that thing that broke us that opportunity again once it has been ripped. Racism, without a doubt, has ripped at the fabric of our trust with one another, cross-racially. We are suspicious of one another, and we are even suspicious of ourselves because of what race has told us about ourselves. Race has got us to believe that being our authentic self is the problem. I work with people, thousands of people, and that comes up all the time about how we say we can't be our authentic self. Can't be our authentic self at work. We can't be our authentic self here. We can't be our authentic self there. And what it equates to is that race has gotten us to believe that who we really are is the problem, when the reality is who we really are is the solution. And to be able to see ourselves and other people and then hold ourselves accountable to being exactly who we are is so important, and is a part of accountability. Would you go to the next slide? So now, I want you to think about this. I'm going to tell you another story. I like teaching through stories. So here I am traveling around the world, teaching people how to get in touch with their power. And I'm at home really doing the opposite, but don't know it. So on this particular occasion, I have my oldest daughter, who's 27 now. She was 16 in high school. And, you know, she lived with me, with just me and her. And I would go to pick her up from school on a daily basis. When I would pick her up, we had this thing where when she got in the car, I would just say, you know, honey, how was your day? Tell me about your day. She would start to tell me about her day. Before she could finish telling me about her day, I'm already on the phone with a client. And I did that without even thinking about it, without even, you know, wondering what kind of impact it was going to have. None of that stuff. So I was unconscious of what I'm doing on that regard. So on this particular day, I did a father talk to a group of Black men who are all fathers, and I was, you know, telling them how good of a father I thought I was. I was really feeling myself. I was in my ego, and I was bragging about all the things that I did to be a good father, and how I played tea time with my daughters and all this other stuff. So that day when she got in the car, I was like, I said, I want to ask her something. What I was really fishing for is I wanted some compliments from her. I was just on the road, you know? So I say to her, I say, Naja, Daddy want to ask you a question, and I want you to listen to the question, and I want you to know before you answer, I'm not going to get mad at whatever answer you give to me. All I want is the truth from you. Daddy really wants to know. Now, y'all should know that's not true, right? I just didn't want to hear her tell the truth. I wanted her to hear her say, Daddy, you've been so great of a daddy to me. I would not be where I am without you. Thank you so much. That's what I was getting ready for. I was, you know, and she says to me, she says, Daddy, I'm so glad you asked me that question because I've been thinking about it for a long time. I was like, what? What do you mean you've been thinking about it for a long time? She says, well, I have. So I said, hold up, wait a minute. Just answer the question. I said, why you got to go, you know, take the long route? Just give me the answer. Am I a good father or not? And she says, well, Daddy, to be honest with you, you're a lousy father. Whoa. Everything stopped for me. Of course, I got upset, and I had to end up apologizing to her for getting upset at her answer because I just got through telling her that I wouldn't get upset no matter what she said. So after I apologized, I begged her, I said, please tell me what makes me such a lousy father because I thought I was doing a good job. She says, Dad, you don't listen to anything. I said, it's not true. She says, you're not listening now. I said, yes, I am. She says, you do this all the time. You really don't listen. I said, wait a minute, Naja. Would you please take a moment and tell me, how do you know I don't listen to you? She says, Dad, I've been telling you things for years. And she says, I comes back and I ask you about them and you have no recollection of them. You have no recognition that you've ever really sat down and listened to me. And she says, you know what? I've come to 3 conclusions as a result of you not listening to me. Number 1, you really don't love me. Every time I think about that, it really hits me. She says, you don't really love me. You're doing what you have to do because that is what fathers do. She says, that's number 1. Number 2, you don't know me. She says, you walk around telling everybody how close me and you are, and you don't know me at all. And the other thing she said was basically, She wanted me to stop telling people that I knew who she was. And I was like, wow. In that moment, I put away my own hurt because I felt hurt. And I started to imagine what she had been going through. All those years of me traveling all around the world and teaching other people about the very thing that I was doing the opposite of at home. And it was such an opportunity because in that moment, I sensed that I was on the verge of losing my daughter, losing her to the world, losing her to whatever. And I wanted to do something, not just lip service, but I wanted to tell the truth through an outcome that would prove not only that I was listening, but that I was going to be a different person. So I made an agreement with myself and her to go on a talking diet. And that talking diet would last 3 years. And here's how it worked. I literally would listen 80% and talk 20%. So even when I was facilitating workshops with my co-facilitators, let's say it was an anti-racism workshop, I would only say the bare minimum that I had to say. And the rest of the time, I would just listen. And let me tell y'all something. One of the most painful things I've had to do in my life, my ego was that big. It was so big that listening to people was painful. And it was making me get in touch with the idea that here I was setting up relationships where I was the one making demands, but I was not making myself available to have demands be made on me. As parents, we do it all the time with our kids. We are constantly making demands on them. And they're not in the position to make demands on us unless we put ourselves in the position to have demands be made on us. And that day, I made a decision to put about reciprocal accountability, where I would give her the right to leverage me, just like I had been leveraging her, to produce the outcomes that I said I was going to produce because I wasn't producing them. If she was coming out feeling like I didn't love her, like we wasn't close, and I didn't know her, I was doing so much damage, right? And so I practiced that for 3 years, and literally I came back to life in places that I didn't even know that I had left life. So you can't practice Ubuntu if you don't listen to one another. You can't begin to see yourselves in other people if you don't listen to the least among us. You know, when we used to do the workshop, we would ask, you know, why aren't people who are experiencing poverty listened to? The least among us. We have a listening that already exists in our mind that prevents us from hearing people in real time. And hearing is not the same as listening. Listening is picking up on what is not being said behind what you're hearing. It's really getting in tune with each other, which is a necessary part of accountability. It's a very necessary part. So if we want to begin to start transforming our world, to start healing, we have to bring in reciprocal demands. And one of the first things that show up in reciprocal demands is the simple fact that we start to listen to each other. There is nothing more powerful to a voice wanting to be heard than for someone to listen. I work with adults on all ages, all different walks of life, all races. And I'm gonna tell you, the one thing that I've found through my coaching practice in the past 30 years has been this need to be heard and listened to. This need to be, we get our value based upon how well we're listened to when we're children. If we are listened to as a child, we grow up well-adjusted. If we are not listened to, we grow up struggling with the idea of our value, our self-worth, etc., etc. Go to the next slide. I'm missing a slide. Anyway, I know what it is, so we get a chance to talk about it. So there are 3 different types of accountability, which should come before this last slide. The first type of accountability is universal, and you know it as the law of oh Lord, universal accountability is based on the law of the reciprocal law, that what goes up must come down, what goes around comes around. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That is based in the universal construct that everything that we do is creating something. Everything that we do is creating. Everything we say is doing something, and it has its own consequences. And no one could take you off of the track of those consequences, good, bad, or ugly. That is not based upon anybody else's feelings, right? So that's the first basic accountability that exists in our universe. The second type of accountability is one-way accountability. Now, what happens when one person is able to make demands on another person and that person is not able to make demands back on them? What kind of relationship would you call that? How would you classify that relationship? Most people will call it abusive, right? Oppressive, right? So when racism was established, the very construct that we lived in was one-way accountability, where society was making demands on people of color, and people of color were not in the position to make demands back on the dominant society. And a lot of that still exists today. One-way accountability is the source of an oppressive society. There is nothing healthy that comes out of one-way accountability, because what it does, it creates relationships where people do not grow. We don't grow as human beings unless we are in the position to have demands be made on us like we are making demands on other people. So every construct that we set up, every social construct we set up, where there's a hierarchy, where you have one group that is able to make more demands on everybody else, we are talking about a system of oppression. If we're going to heal from racism, it's going to be because we bring into existence reciprocal accountability or reciprocal demand. So ask yourself this question: where are you not making yourself available to have demands be made on you like you're making demands on other people? Where? Where in your life is that? Would it be with your kids, maybe your significant others, co-workers? Where in your life do you feel like demands are being made of you, but you are unable to make those same level of demands back on those who are making demands on you? Because that's like power over, and reciprocal demand is power with, right? Ubuntu rests in the idea of having power with one another. And together, through cooperation, we can build a society that is a reflection of all of our beauty, not just certain people's beauty. We are right now sitting at a point to where everything is changing. And everything is changing because people are waking up to the fact that we are making this up as we go. Our world has been a social construct from the very beginning, which simply means we're making it up as we go. So if we're making it up as we go, and that's what we've been doing, why can't we make up something else? Why can't we make up something that's healthier? Why can't we make up something where we are sharing power with rather than power over? And we all need to ask ourselves this question as I close. What promises have you failed to keep to yourself? What promises have you failed to keep to others? And what promises have others failed to keep to you? Because that is the condition of our world. The condition of our world, the truth we're telling is really found more in the answers to those questions than any other questions. Because all of our problems, all of our human problems, our humanity problems are rooted in broken promises. They're rooted in broken promises and no accountability to leverage each other to bring about a healing in those spaces. So now, it's been a long time since I did anything close to what they call a keynote. Because for years I used to just do keynotes. And then I recognized after when I went through that talking diet that it wasn't effective for me. I needed to sit with people and listen to people and have conversations with people, because I was impacting people's lives and I wanted to be aware of how I was impacting people's lives, and I wanted people to impact my life. So this is kind of like outside of my wheelhouse for right now, but I've appreciated the idea of being able to just talk to the screen. You know, and right now I think if there are any questions or anything about anything that I've said, I'm open for them. I don't know how it goes, but this has been a wonderful opportunity. I want you to keep in mind that accountability is not a weapon. It is really a tool for healing if it's reciprocal. If it's one way, it will be a weapon that destroys, creates oppression, and continues to recreate what we've already got. If we want to have something different, then we have to put ourselves in reciprocal accountability and have reciprocal demands be put on us in every position we're in. That's the only way we grow. Anybody got any questions?
Please don't be shy. Anybody with questions, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand. I'm not sure if we can. Yeah, I think we'll be able to see if you raise your hand with a question. I think we're all digesting. That was an amazing talk that you just gave, even though you say you're not a keynoter. That was wonderful.
Yeah, I haven't practiced keynoting because the last time I did it was like maybe, believe it or not, 20 years ago. I was invited to this corporation to do this keynote, and I was paid a lot of money. And I was practicing the talking diet, and I heard myself saying nothing very loudly. And I decided to shut up and go listen. And the first thing I decided to do was go listen to women, because I had almost zero listening for women in my being. I've been socialized like so many other men to overlook women, to not understand the importance and the value and the intelligence from women. I had to go sit and listen to women. It enriched my life so much, but that's why I shut up and stopped doing keynotes, because I want to be that kind of person that has an impact on people, really putting people back in touch with their power. And there was a part of my power that I wasn't in touch with because I had not learned to listen to women. It was part of my socialization.
Theo, Rita had her hand up.
Oh, Rita. Okay, please, Rita. And then we have a few questions coming in the chat, so we will get to those after we hear what Rita has.
I wanted to thank you for your personal stories. I will remember what you said because of your story about Christmas in your childhood, because of your story about the experience with your daughter, and just right now because of your story about why you don't do keynotes very often. And so since you didn't get to know me much, I got to know you a whole lot in this limited frame, but it's important, and I thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening. We do so much for each other through listening. There are times where clients will bring me on board to work with them just to listen to them.
We have a question from Angela Matthews. Angela, if you're there and you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question that you have about the ego reduction formula.
Sure.
Are you there? Great.
Yes, I am. Thank you. And thank you for this really wonderful presentation. I got
You're welcome.
so much out of it. And I'm curious, I think there's a Buddha over your shoulder. I'm not really sure if that is,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
So maybe this relates to that as well. Because I'm curious about your ego reduction formula, and if you could talk about that in relation to your decision to shift your talking listening formula.
Well, you know, you're welcome. Thank you for that question. The whole ego reduction formula is really about us reducing the size of our performance, right? So most people, we live most of our lives performing. We don't know that we're performing because we've been socialized to perform and see it as normal. And as we begin to start wanting to get in touch with our true, authentic self, We have to reduce the amount of behavior that and patterns and habits that we have developed that are all about performing that we have not really become aware of. So I go along with Carl Jung's definition of ego when he was talking to a group of his students, and he says, the world will ask you who you are. And if you say to the world you don't know, then the world will tell you who you are. And who the world tells you that you are becomes your ego.
Mm.
I interpret that to mean that your ego is who you are trying to be for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend most of our lives trying to be stuff for other people until we reach a certain age and it hits us like a ton of bricks that we have not lived the life that we came here to live.
Mm-hmm.
That we've been living the life that other people want us to live, and there's no happiness in it. There's no fulfillment in it. So in the ego reduction formula, I teach people how to feed the needs of their soul rather than feed the needs of their ego.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Rita. I think
Very
Dave,
much so. Thank you. Very much
yes,
so.
thanks, Rita, for that great question. I think David, I don't know what your last name is, but you put a question in the chat. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask that?
Sure, thank you. I'm wondering whether you've had had experience in persuading organizations or institutions to think seriously about reciprocal accountability.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. Thank you for that question. When people say systems and institutions, we know that we're not talking about computers and buildings. What we're talking about is people. But what we tend to do is we tend to overlook individuals who make up the institutions. And we think that it's something bigger that we're hitting on, but it's really people. So we work with people all the time, and people from all different walks of life, because all people have power. And when they come into reality of it, come into get in contact with it, they begin to understand how they can have leverage, first of all, on themselves, and then how to create relationships that leverage each other to produce the reciprocal accountability we're talking about. So we've had some success with organizations who have been implementing it within their construct, but it has not been readily like embraced because we are still addicted to the conflict that comes with power over people and one-way accountability. There's so much insecurity in our society. In other words, human beings are insecure because we've been feeding the needs of our ego over our soul, and so we haven't been developing ourselves adequately. So we live most of our lives insecure. That's what the idea of living a life to please other people creates, an insecure life.
Thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
have another question here from Deborah. Deborah, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Well, if Deborah's not there to ask it, I will read her question. Did you struggle with holding your words and listening to others' truths and perspectives?
Oh, yes, indeed. Wow, that's an understatement there, that struggle. Literally, it was painful. And it was then I became aware of just how profound my ego was in my life. That I wanted you to listen to me, but I was always like, come on, get this over with. Come on, say what you got to say. So now you can listen to me because I'm the important person in this equation. So to sit and listen was literally like, at first it was like a little boy being put in punishment. I didn't want to be there, but because it was for my daughter, because I was doing it because I wanted to save my relationship with my daughter, it caused me to be a bigger person than I was at that time in order to want to save our relationship, because I realized I had been destroying the relationship quietly, subtly, you know, step by step, small incremental pieces, just destroying the relationship. All under the guise that I was doing a great job because I was doing the things that fathers, quote unquote, are supposed to do.
Thank you. Jerry Ann, do we have time for another question or two, or are we coming up against time now?
We have time.
Great.
Yeah, we have time.
Excellent. Anybody have a question that you're dying to ask? Now is the time. I don't see any hand raises, but you can do that.
See Ann Romney and Reverend Thompson, I think.
Oh, great. Ann, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, mine isn't a question as much as it is a deep appreciation to your amazing power of vulnerability. That you spoke today to us in a way that was so honest and so rare to see someone speak in the way that you did, as a man, as a strong person, sharing that kind of human vulnerability to all of us is an enormous gift and so powerful. So I want to just thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. I appreciate you saying that. I work hard at it.
And we had another question.
Your ego is always wanting to show up. You can't really kill it. It's always wanting to show up. And when you are put on the center stage, your ego can make a mess of things if you're not careful about being honest. Honesty keeps our ego at bay. The moment you start being honest, your ego says, "Oh, well, bye. I'll talk to you later. I'll come back when you get you get through telling the truth."
See, Bob had his hand up. Theo.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you,
Yes.
what you would say differently to those fathers about fatherhood now that you've had your shift in understanding how you operate in the world. What would you say differently to them about fatherhood?
Thank you for that question. I would say, stop pretending. Stop pretending to be something that you really don't understand, and just let your children know that you don't have all the answers, but you're willing to be vulnerable for them so that they can get in touch with and get to know you. Because we play these roles without people ever seeing us. And it's unfortunate that we live our lives, a great number of us, and people never see who we are. Not because they didn't have the opportunities, because the reality is we didn't open ourselves up. So the thing I would tell them is to open themselves up to their children completely. Don't hide from their children.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. I really appreciate it.
We have a couple of others here. There is a question in the chat from Ms. Heading, or Weeding. Am I getting that wrong? I'm sorry. I apologize. The question is, how could we share this with politicians and CEOs? And I think the question is, how can we share maybe all of these great pieces of information that you've relayed to us? How do we share that with politicians and CEOs? If I'm getting that right.
Right. And what I would caution with that is seeing politicians and CEOs as having more power than the average human being. Because that is a part of the construct that keeps us from really seeing how powerful we really are. Because we keep making other people more powerful than us because they have material success. Some of the people that we're looking up to, I work with, and they are so unhappy that you would not believe it. They feel so disempowered, and we are looking up to them as being all powerful because they have material success. But some of the things in life that we want the most, they don't have, and they are really seeking. So we have been socialized to believe that they have the answers, when the reality is most of us have the answers. And it's time that they start listening to us, not just us listening to them.
So hi.
And when I sit down and talk to them, I tell them that. And, you know, most of them appreciate the honesty of being, you know, if having a conversation with another human being that does not see them up here, but even.
May I just have the opportunity to just sort of clarify? My question is, thank you so much. Am very impacted by what you said. It's heading. And so my question is more in a reference in terms of not so much seeing politicians or CEOs up higher as much as really wanting them to really grasp what you spoke about in terms of listening.
Okay.
Others and being able to, I think I'm more interested really in terms of, have you engaged with them to sort of teach them that some of the techniques that you've learned and to share with them so they might listen better in terms of as we sort of begin to, as we are not necessarily beginning, but have tried to make a difference in this world around equity and inclusion and so forth.
I would say that I've been working with quite a few, and started working a lot with Hollywood, because we've been targeting Hollywood because Hollywood does a lot of the socialization, a lot of the programming. So if we can help change some of the narratives that are out there around this, we think it'll have a big impact. And we've been working with quite a few, and we hope to continue to. And one of the ways that I do it is just we simply enter into a conversation. A lot of them, when they hire me as their coach, you know, my approach is different. My approach begins with just talking, just having conversation. And what I do is listen for where the hurt is that no one else sees or picks up on because they have material this, material that. But when you learn to listen, you learn to pick up on the hurt that people have, that they are hiding, that needs to be healed before they can really be of service on a higher level to other people, just because they have material success.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a question from Tanya. Tanya, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, when you were talking about accountability on all levels, I was thinking about schools, since I work in K-12. And I definitely see the one-way accountability. I'm interested in what, you know, or some of the things you most want to see shift in education.
I would like to see education really be what it is, education, rather than it being programming, because the idea of it just being programming and we teaching kids to just take tests and how to pass tests is not, it's within itself is one-way accountability. When we talk about education, then that means we're talking about reciprocal accountability. We're talking about teachers learning from students as much as students are learning from teachers. And teachers are entering into an environment where they know that they are learning from their students and can grow from their students just as much as their students can grow from them. And when that level playing field is created, where kids are seen as full human beings, not as beings that have partial humanity, but full humanity and full rights, and listen to them from that perspective, this whole world will change. The way we've been treating children is it's deplorable.
Yes, thank you for that question, Tanya. And I think we have time for one last question. Allison had her hand raised. Allison, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. And thank you, Mahdi. It was amazing. And
you're welcome, Allison.
So many reflections. And so one of the things that I was reflecting on when you were talking about the history of broken promises and treaties, and I know that those are my ancestors, at least from a racial standpoint, that broke many of those treaties and broke many of those promises. And so just wondering what your thoughts or beliefs are around the role of self-love and self-forgiveness in accountability.
It's a good question. I think it's so important that the healing among white people has to begin with them getting in touch with the promises that were broken and the impact of those promises broken. And then realize that most of those promises you didn't break because it was your ancestors who broke them. So, you know, like I tell people all the time, there's no one here that actually had a hand in creating racism. We are all participating in the perpetuation of it, but none of us created it. So then we have a different responsibility for healing. The healing is all about you bringing it into your role in perpetuating racism. So you have to become consciously aware, how do I perpetuate racism in small incremental ways? Because racism lives in our nervous system. It lives in our subconscious programming, as we call it, in our groundwater. And if we don't transform our subconscious programming and change our habits and tendencies, then we could say we're healing, but the outcomes would be the same. And the outcomes are always the truth we're really telling. The outcomes you're producing are always the truth you're really telling. Change the outcomes and you tell a different truth. As long as the institutions and systems keep producing what they're producing, then we know what truth they're telling, which is they're not open yet for full-scale reciprocal accountability. Thank you for that question, Allison. Appreciate you too, honey.
And I said that was the last question, but I'm just going to give one last question to Steve, where he asked, do you find that some people fear their own healthy power? I don't know if that's a question that you can answer quickly, or probably not, but maybe you can give it a shot.
Well, we are afraid of it because we're not used to it. We're so used to being disempowered that we've made that like the norm. It's not natural, but we've made it the norm. Normal and natural are not the same thing. So when we see what we are truly capable of and we start holding ourselves accountable to it, that means we got to show up every day. You know, we can't continue to be lazy. We have to show up. It takes work to be a full human being. And fear is a part of it, but guess what? Guess what courage is? All courage is, I'm afraid, but I'm going anyway, right? So we could be afraid. It's cool to be afraid. Just go anyway, you know, until you start knocking down those fears. And then you start noticing that the fears are dissipating. And then there was really nothing to be afraid of because it's only yourself that you're dealing with. If we stop fighting with ourselves, oh my God. Imagine your life if you stop fighting with you. You're welcome. You're welcome, Steve.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been such an enlightening session, and I wrote down so many takeaways from it, but right from the start, you know, you're saying accountability is necessary because we break our promises. I think that's such a powerful statement, and one that we really have to think about, because we don't like to think that we break our promises, but we all do. We all do. Your idea of this we need reciprocal accountability. And with that, we find a restoration of trust. And then you talked about relationships are human mirrors. Some people quoted you in the chat, and I was just picking up on the things that really caught folks, and that was certainly one of them. Listen 80% and talk 20%. I think we can all take that and use that piece of advice. And then finally, listening, the importance of listening. And I want to thank everyone here for listening, and for you especially, for listening to the questions and answering so authentically and with so much compassion for everyone here. Very much appreciated. And I want to thank the Black Heritage Trail for putting on this wonderful conference. So I think we're coming up to the time, and we will be going to the next session, and looking forward to that. So thank you all.
Thank you.